Geography 110, this is the second official lecture. This is on industry revolutions in production. Okay. And today, what we're going to talk about is industrialization. Last time we talked about the market, marketization, commodification, and the spread of the market. Today we're going to talk about industrialization and the spread of industry. And remember, we're the first part of the course, we're trying to establish these great prime movers of the modern economy. We're trying to see the economy as necessarily historical, necessarily dynamic, and necessarily geographical, before we get to industrial location and things more specific topics. So keys. Keys today are that industrialization actually is what's created the modern world in a material sense, the stuff you see all around you. And subordinate point to that is that unlike most industrial geography courses, economic geography courses, I don't start with the idea of industrial location. Where is the optimal place for industry to go given the shape of the world? What I'm saying is that in the longer view, the shape of the world is created by industry, has been created by modern industry. That industry, since the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th century, has spread around the world. It is still spreading. It is still dynamic. It is still chewing out people and spewing out goods at an ever greater level. And we talk about the Industrial Revolution, which does change everything, but in a sense there are continual industrial revolutions. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll do a long kind of survey through the spread of industry, starting from Britain, Europe, and North America, through China and India today. And then we'll see at the very end, we'll talk about, well, what does that mean for the U.S. and the core economies that industrialized earlier? And we'll start to see that creates problems. Now, today is not a lecture about problems and crises. That will be lecture 4. But we've got to lay this foundation, which we'll get to right at the end. Okay? All right, so making 4 topics today, none of which has a point in front of it, so I don't know why I'm there. The making of the modern world, the long 19th century, the post-war era, and the new millennium, late 20th century, early 21st. Okay, so we're going to start here with making of the modern world and just talk a little bit about industrial revolution, industrial revolutions. So, the industrial revolution takes us beyond that lecture on the market. The market revolution was a necessary antecedent, but it isn't sufficient, contrary to official economics. You have to talk about the industrial revolution, one of the great events of human history. And indeed, it does have a kind of starting point. It's not real precise, but late 18th and early 19th century. And it really changes everything again. It accelerates the whole process of what some cultural studies people like to call modernization. And, of course, the key to the Industrial Revolution is, for the first time in history, going from predominantly hand labor, often very, very skilled, and human backs, and animal power, to machinery, fossil fuels, and various kinds of automatons. Today, of course, are computers. Nice old picture of Waltham, Massachusetts, the first great textile factory in America, which is now part of Boston, but still a suburb called Waltham, which, by the way, was made by the Waltham Works, just to prove my point. I sound echoey. Am I okay to you guys? All right, okay. Okay, so industry creates a new world. This Industrial Revolution created a whole new world. And if you look at Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, his argument is that the wealth of nations is not based on agriculture alone. It is not based on simply piling up gold bullion, as the Spanish thought, and some of the mercantilist theorists thought. It is based on the ability to manufacture things. Now, it's also based on the ability to raise productivity in agriculture, which Adam Smith knew very well because he was actually a gentleman farmer himself. And industrialization is going on to create the wealth of nations, which is stuff, things. Now, we'll come back in a later lecture to talk about things, substantial and insubstantial. We'll talk a little bit about it next week with technology and a little bit more about it in a lecture in the second half of the course. But all those things you see at Walmart and all the things you see around you, the chairs you sit in, the floor tiles, the ceiling tiles, the lamp, these are all industrial products. And without it, you still have to go back to handcraft kind of technologies and products, which means a very, very different life. Okay. So everything pretty much you live with and see around you and benefit from is a product of industry. And that industrial revolution is still going on today, whether it's in robotics or it's incredible plastic molding machines, metal bending machines, whatever it may be. We tend to think of technology as being iPods or iPads now, but it is a lot of just very big material stuff that we depend on. Now, there are arguments about epochs of industrial history. I'll come back to this. Some people think that you can clearly see a point where you go from a first industrial revolution to a second, to a third. You hear a lot of talk about the internet and the digital revolution being the third industrial revolution, or the new industrial revolution, the new economy. But it's actually just a continuation of what's been going on now for 200 years, over 200 years. The evidence is pretty clear in terms of productivity, numbers of products, that this has just been a steady rise over time. Labor productivity has gone up. The number of products has gone from a few tens of thousands, a few thousand, to now tens of millions coming out of this system. And it's very hard to actually see, and this is always a puzzle when you do any kind of history, is to say when does something change to something else. And in fact, the data, in just quantitative terms, seems to support a view of rather continuous industrial innovation and growth over time. But if you want, I can lay out here a typical scheme of industrial revolutions. The nice thing about this is that it does mark epochs. And when we look back through history, we recognize that antebellum and postbellum are different songs. Well, nobody got that at all. Never mind. But antebellum and postbellum are different. Post-World War, we always say post-war, things really changed a lot around World War II, and it made a difference. Just like internet is making a big difference, and you can speak of pre-internet and post-internet, and it's true. So people have looked at that and said, okay, well, I see maybe 5 industrial revolutions. That first one in the late 18th century, where it's about textile factories, spinning and weaving, the early iron foundries, the factory itself as an invention, the satanic mills, as Blake called them in one poem. The second industrial revolution, maybe around 1850, where you start to get cutting tools and the ability to make machines by means of machines. And you start to get good steel that you can make machines with, instead of mostly wooden machines, wooden and cast iron machines. The railroad. A lot of people talk about coming to the railroad as a major thing. Huge amounts of steel and wood and these great machines running across the land, speeding up transport. That's a pretty big revolution. And so on. I don't want you to write all this down. Okay? Just listen. Third, around 1900, there was this huge revolution in mass production by Henry Ford. People call Fordism or mass production or the assembly line. Electricity doesn't exist. You don't get electrification. You get the telephone. Some really huge inventions get taken up around 1900. Around World War II, the oil economy really kicks in. The oil economy had been pretty small before that. But you get petrochemicals, which you never had before. Catalytic cracking. Start to get plastics coming out of petrochemicals. And boy, plastics changed the world. So that famous line in The Graduate where he says, go into plastics, turns out to be true. Would have been very good advice, though we all laughed at it in the 1960s. But plastics have changed the world, and as somebody told you last time, are now all swirling around in the mid-Pacific Gyre. They have indeed changed the world as the ducks. And now we have, of course, the internet, digital technologies, these incredible things that you carry around that have everything speeding around at the speed of light, information coming to you. It's pretty bloody astounding. You can read books on an electronic tablet. You know, the newspapers are disappearing, the books are following, libraries, post office. I mean, it's pretty revolutionary. Okay, so, but then there are some people who say, well, no, the first industrial revolution is about 1800, second one's 1900, third one is the millennium, 2000. Who knows? You can argue this endlessly. It's useful up to a point, but I wouldn't fetishize it. But we'll sometimes refer to these things, these epics. Okay, what's in an industrial revolution? What goes on in an industrial revolution? Well, first of all, what the industrial revolution with its machines and its fuels and so on did was to raise labor productivity, to raise all productivity of all inputs, meaning that the unit cost, the cost of producing one item in a series started to fall. You started to get mass production from the beginning. Mass production doesn't just happen with Ford. It already exists. Wedgwood was already doing mass production of porcelains. Mass meaning thousands of the same item coming off of a kind of line, out of a factory. Okay? And that goes on to today, where things like iPads or iPhones, think of cell phones, come out of nowhere, now they're just cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Unless you get a fancier and fancier one, then they get cheaper, and so on. And that productivity comes from new ways of working. The factory, above all, where you could put people together in large numbers and boss them around and watch them. Because they used to work out in their cottages or in the artisanal shop and so on under their own control. Now they're under control of an employer. And within that factory, you start to get Adam Smith, remember his pin factory, and you don't remember it, but anyway, he had this famous example of a pin factory because in his time, there weren't many machines. So he uses just a division of labor within hand labor, and even there, you could already start seeing rising productivity through specialization. And then mechanization. You can start applying machines to tasks that have been simplified. That's a key point, by the way. You have to simplify the tasks before you can mechanize them, especially in the early days of the Industrial Revolution. So we'll talk more about this in Lecture 5. Another dimension we'll talk about in Lectures 6 and 7 will be speeding up movement, speeding up communications, getting that stuff that comes out of the factories to market faster, moving everything around, moving people around, moving information, price information, advertisements, news around. The railroad, for example. There's an old telephone exchange there, and so on. And that's just been going on and on and on since as well. So that's part of the industrial revolutions. And the inputs. And we'll talk about this in the last section of the class. The inputs have been continuously revolutionized. More materials, better materials, getting things like steel, then hard-rolled steel. You can't have Ford, by the way, just a little side note, without a cold-rolled steel that's got nickel and chromium additives to it. So unless you get modern metallurgy, really hard steel, you can't cut it precisely. And your cutting knives, well, you can't cut it precisely, which means you can't have interchangeable parts that always fit. You just can't have that until around 1900. And that's better materials. It isn't just machines. And then, of course, we all know about more and more petroleum. Not that it's really gotten better, but in some ways it has because of higher temperature cracking and so on. You get higher test gasolines and whatnot. And better use of power and so on. And, of course, electricity, the most versatile of all fuels. And we'll talk about that more later, too. And then we just get more and better products. So the Industrial Revolution starts with rather old-fashioned goods. Textiles, that means cloth and garments and sewing machines. Various machines to do something that people have been doing already for millennia. Pottery and porcelains, what they'd also been doing for millennia. Guns, the Colt repeater, and of course clocks. So we think of grandfather clocks as very old-fashioned, but they're actually very modern. And we're very modern at the time they came out. The goods get cheaper, and as they get cheaper, you can consume more of them. And that means we, all of us, can have more things because they cost less. We also start getting more income, so we can buy even more. We'll come back to that in another lecture. And then, over time, of course, the Industrial Revolution has produced technologies that never existed before, new and new things. So computers, you get the typewriter, which doesn't exactly replace the pen, the quill, because it's a kind of different kind of machine that produces it. It more replaces print, actually. But then the computer doesn't exactly replace a typewriter because it does all kinds of things a typewriter can't do. Although a lot of us, all we've ever done on it is type. At least my generation, we just type. And phones, Phones are amazing ways to talk to each other. But think of what a phone does now. It's just nobody could have conceived of a phone doing all those things even 20 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. And growing geography, what I mean by this is that industrialization actually creates the geography of the modern world. It creates economic geography. We don't have a topic. We don't have a class without industrialization. Okay, so again, not locational optimization in the way of certain kind of economic geographies that are based on conventional economics. This is about the dynamics of production, producing a world. And new industries have a way, as new industries come along producing new products, they have a way of producing new places. So the textile mills of the first industrial revolution created Manchester, England, created Lowell, Manchester, New Hampshire, Waltham, Fall River, a whole series of cities, industrial cities. Also helped grow Boston, even though it didn't have factories. Helped grow New York, Patterson, ultimately Chicago, and so on and so on and so on. And this is going on today. These are factories in Guangdong. And you go a place like Shenzhen, which essentially didn't exist before the reforms in China. I mean, Guangzhou did, and it's become the central, it's the most biggest city in Guangdong, and has factory towns and villages and suburbs all around it. But Shenzhen, which is now a city of at least 10 million, and it's all industry, basically, and in some ways more important than Guangzhou now, entirely a creation of the last 30 years of industrialization of Guangdong. And we'll talk more about how cities are created by industry later on. I'm just getting this idea in place. How does industry make places? It builds factories. The factories attract workers. Often they recruit them. You build housing for the workers. Bingo, you got a town. But then the industry attracts suppliers. Suppliers of machinery, suppliers of inputs, suppliers of fuel. Intermediaries, distributors are going to take some of the products and sell them somewhere else. People are going to build the rafts or the steamboats that are going to go up and down the Ohio to Cincinnati to take the industrial beef and take it up and down the Midwest in the 1800s, and so on. And then all of those things require roads, they require water supplies, ultimately electricity and gas and so on. Somebody's going to make those. People are working on those all the time. So you get a huge construction industry and government infrastructure and PG&E and so on and so on and so on. And that's how cities get built. And we're in a pretty good place to talk about this because we live in a place, San Francisco, which essentially didn't exist prior to the gold rush. And once the gold rush was over after about 5 years, San Francisco started to become a commercial and industrial center and built itself up from there. Silicon Valley. was a bunch of prune orchards until high-tech came along. Boom. Now there's 2 million people living down there. Industrialization also drives national development. We'll have lectures on that. So the whole development of countries, and partly what I'm doing today, going country by country. The growth of cities and regions within countries drives globalization. Why has Britain become the great power of the 19th century? It has the first industrial revolution. Why is the U.S. a great power after World War II? It has the most industry. Pretty simple, basic process. Why is the U.S., or why is everybody talking about China today? It's not because we have a cult of Deng Xiaoping. It's because Chinese industry is spewing out goods around the world. So, if I could only see somebody ever make me a YouTube of the map of industry going around the world, I have a great little thing to put up here, but nobody ever has. So, but imagine industrial geography as a movie, like dropping a stone in the pond and watching the rings go out. That's what's been going on. And it's imperfect, it's up and down, there's many places that haven't developed, but in terms of the ones that have, it's just going on and on, farther and farther, creating a bigger geography, which today gives us what? Globalization. Why are we all talking about globalization over the last 20 years? Because of the industrialization of East Asia. And suddenly Americans going, oh, where did that come from? Folks, can you keep it quiet? Well, it's either that or close the door, in which case you all suffocate and go to sleep, which then means I have nobody to talk to. So, okay, the long 19th century. Well, this stuff, a lot of this is very familiar to you. So, again, I'm just running through it. I don't want to beat it to death by any means. Just a few broad strokes to make my point. So we start with Great Britain, we'll go to North America, and so on. So, first industrial revolution happens in Britain. Britain starts to change. Its landscape changes. It starts getting these factories. You start getting scenes like this, before photography. So you have to get old lithographs. And Manchester becomes the workshop of the world. That's a name that was given to Manchester in the early 1800s, and this propels Britain to the top. And it turns Britain upside down, by the way. That's a map of Manchester. That's 1750, 1850. So you can see industry grew Manchester from a very unimportant northern town to one of the most important cities in England. And you can see that industrial development is spotty. It's not everywhere. It's in certain parts. I can't distinguish that from that, so we'll just say that this is up to 1850. And, of course, the Midlands with Birmingham, Lancaster, up here, Sheffield, Manchester, Leeds, Bradford. These are all major industrial towns in the north. So a lot of the north, which was really not very important, or was kind of the backwater of England, suddenly becomes the most important part of England, except, of course, London never goes away. And all of this helps build London even more. And parts of these some industry goes into places in Derbyshire or Shropshire and so on, where there's nothing today, actually. It all disappeared later on. So Britain ends up, the rule of Britannia I talked about last time isn't just about the navy and trade and the king and overthrowing the king. It's about building industry, which is what gave Britain such a huge advantage. You could build more guns faster to go conquer people, just to begin with. And everybody else since then was trying to catch up. That's a nice little lithograph of London, Thames. This then spreads over to continental Europe. Nice book on this, Sidney Pollard's Peaceful Conquest. There's another one which name I can't remember right now. But starts to spread in the early 19th century, gets as far as inklings of it in Paris, in Württemberg, in what's now West Germany, in parts of Belgium, the Low Countries. Just the smatterings of it. But by 1850, it's really roaring, and you get the Second Empire, Paris, which just becomes this huge city of a couple million people. Specialized industrial cities like Lille and Saint-Étienne. In Germany, along the Ruhr Valley, branch of the Rhine, around Berlin, starts to grow with the unification of Germany and get some huge electrical, well, it will get electrical. Baden-Württemberg will get chemicals and all kinds of large, modern, heavy industries. Also, Barcelona in Spain, pretty much the only part of Spain, and then later Bilbao will become industrial shipbuilding and so on. And northern Italy starts, Torino and Milan and so on start to industrialize in the 19th century. So Europe starts to industrialize. This is a map, not a very good one. We always have to deal with this from Pollard's book. This is 1815. You can see it's around Britain all the way up in Scotland. Here's Barcelona a little bit, eastern France. Now, he doesn't even show Paris on this, but he's not right. But anyway. But then, take this as an approximation, but you can see it spreading east all the way in 1875, even getting into Russia. All blobs look bigger when they're in Russia, but I don't know if they really were bigger. The whole Rhine Valley down to the Low Countries, northern France, and so on, so northern Italy, and so on and so forth. So by 1875, Europe is highly industrialized. And of course, we talk about imperial competition, imperial powers. Why is it the Germans and the French and the Brits are all racing to try to get more colonies? Because they got more stuff to sell. And because they need more inputs. They need more sisal. They need more cotton. They need more metals. They need more potash, and so on, to feed into this ever-growing industrial and agricultural system. Germany, of course, a special, very important case, the most powerful industrial country in Europe eventually, starts to industrialize mostly in the West, on the Rhineland, where most of the action is, and it's still to this day. Is the most important industrial areas around Stuttgart. The Ruhr Valley's gone way down with the end of heavy industry, but it's bouncing back in other lines. But it's very fragmented in the West. That historical accident and process in Germany of not being unified, it finally gets unified in 1870, where basically Prussia, or Brandenburg, has come up over the years as a great military power based on rather semi-feudal relations. It conquers West Germany, unifies the whole thing, but continues with this route of industrialization. So it's a kind of powerful combination of industrial, liberal, marketized West, and a very centralized, authoritarian, semi-feudal